Starry, starry night, paint your palette blue and gray. Look out on a summer's day with eyes that know the darkness in my soul. Shadows on the hills, sketch the trees and the daffodils.
Howdy folks, Lisa here at Everything is a Lie again. I hope everyone is well. I'm very happy to be back making content. I've got a boat about to launch behind me. If I cut suddenly, it's because there's people there. A warm welcome back to my loyal subscribers and any previous viewers, and also welcome to those encountering me on my channel for the first time today. It's wonderful to have you all here. I must give a huge thank you to the generous subscribers who donated to the channel recently. Your support helps keep the channel going. I'm well caffeinated and ready to go again. Let's orient ourselves geographically. You are here today, here with me. We're back in South Australia, where I left off in Everything is Salty and the nearby Shingle Beach. Those videos are prerequisites for this one. I'll leave you the link below if you haven't already seen those. Unfortunately, I hightailed it to Sydney shortly after Shingle Beach to catch up with family, so we are backtracking a bit here because we missed a lot of important ruins, destruction, destroyed star forts, the same as I did in Western Australia. Oh, hang on, I have a truck. Hopefully they're just pulling up for lunch. I'm still to catch up on those West Australian star forts. My apologies, everyone. Once I make some more space on the hard drive. I did fly back last year and stayed at a very important golf resort so I could get some footage of that. It's what Paul Cook would call geopolymer, for sure. Still pending. A lot of people seem to think that Australia didn't really have bastions or star forts, or maybe there were just a couple here and there. It was when I was watching an interview with Paul Cook almost 2 years ago, and he said the words, "Think like Amsterdam." And my guide was in my ear hissing, "Yes, this is what I'm trying to tell you. Australia was the same, but try finding them." While the US was purportedly still building them, Australia was erasing them from living memory and the face of the land post-flood. No history of them remains at all. It's down to painstakingly, say that again, it's down to painstakingly putting the evidence back together and hunting down the clues. So that's where I'm at. I'll elaborate further today. Without further ado, let's cue the rooster, and I'll give you some words and numbers to get everyone up to speed on the area we're looking at today.
Wake up and listen.
Let's go. Some information and images from this World Atlas page to start us off. The Great Australian Bight. A bight is an open, broad and shallow bay or a concave bend in geographical features like coastlines, cliffs or rivers. Bights are different from sounds in that the latter is much deeper. Thus, the Great Australian Bight is a natural embayment or oceanic bight stretching across Australia's southern coast. This Australian coastal area is part of the Indian Ocean and is a unique environment containing diverse marine species, including threatened and endangered mammals. The official account goes that it formed over 50 million years ago when the Gondwana supercontinent broke apart. The first European explorers came across the Bight in 1627 and charted it in 1802. It is a large, shallow, open bay in the Indian Ocean that indents Western and South Australia's southern coastlines. The open bay covers an area of approximately 46,000 square kilometres, with depths ranging from 15 to 6,000 metres. Although the Great Australian Bight is part of the Indian Ocean, the Australian Hydrographic Service considers it to be part of the Southern Ocean. The Australian Hydrographic Service defines the embayment as stretching between Cape Pasley in Western Australia and Cape Carnot in South Australia, approximately 1,160 kilometres. The head of the Bight lies to the south of the Nullarbor Plain, a plain across Western Australia and Southern Australia, and is bounded by cliffs reaching a height 60 to 120 metres. Cape Arid National Park and Nuyts Land Reserve are on the Bight's shores between Israelite Bay and Eucla. The Research Archipelago and Nuyts Archipelago are considered part of the Great Australian Bight. The town of Ceduna on the Bight's eastern side is one of the largest centres for people wishing to visit or explore the region. It is said that the Australian Aboriginal people, particularly the Spinifex and the Wongai, hunted along the Great Australian Bight coastline and Nullarbor Plains. Officially, it was not until 1672 that the first European, Francois Tyson, encountered the Bight when he sailed along its western edge in his VOC ship. In 1802, English navigator Matthew Flinders charted the Bight's entire shortline during his travel around the Australian continent. A few decades later, Edward John Eyre, another English explorer, allegedly accomplished the bay's land-based survey. What they neglect to mention is that the entire place is riddled with caves, so whilst it looks entirely flat and featureless, it's a labyrinth below ground. The Nuyts Archipelago is where we are primarily investigating today. While we're orienting ourselves, I'll take a quick look at the Nullarbor Plain. I'm not going to go through much of this page, I just want to give you a few numbers. The Nullarbor Plain, Latin, nulla feminine or nullus, meaning no, and arbor, tree, is part of the area of flat, almost treeless, arid or semi-arid country of southern Australia, located on the Great Australian Bight coast, with the Great Victoria Desert to its north. It is the world's largest single exposure of limestone bedrock and occupies an area of about 200,000 square kilometres or 77,000 square miles. At its widest point, it stretches about 1,100 kilometres from east to west across the border between South Australia and Western Australia, and also just this part. Geology and geography. The Nullarbor Plain is a former shallow seabed, as indicated by the presence of bryozoans, foraminifera, echinoids and red algae calcareous skeletons that make up the limestone. The region is also the location of Nullarbor limestone, and it has a reputation as a significant karst region with Oligocene and Miocene cave formations. Let's get karst so we can see that. Karst is a topography formed from the dissolution of soluble carbonate rocks. Soluble carbonate rocks such as limestone, dolomite and gypsum. It is characterized by features like polges above and drainage systems with sinkholes and caves underground. More weathering-resistant rocks, such as quartzite, can also occur given the right conditions. These are some caves in Slovenia. Let's take a quick look at some caves under the Nullarbor. And moving on. Let's take a quick look at the aforementioned town of Ceduna. Ceduna is a town in South Australia, located on the shores of Murat Bay, west of the Eyre Peninsula. It lies west of the junction of the Flinders and Eyre highways, around 786 kilometres northwest of the state capital of Adelaide. The nearby port of Thevenard lies 3 kilometres to the west on Cape Thevenard. The town is a fishing port and a railway hub. Note that there is no longer a passenger railway to Ceduna, although I believe there was. The railway history in Australia is rather convoluted, and there are many railways that are owned and maintained for private corporation use only. The original Ceduna railway line was linked to the Port Dock railway terminal in Adelaide City. Ceduna, near the centre of the screen there, as they said, is 786 kilometres to the port terminal, which is definitely old world. A lot of strange power poles and tech there. And I'm more than clear that Adelaide City was another star. Too much to cover today though. I would like to quickly point out that this image from the State Library of South Australia, the alleged construction of the Thevenard Railway, or more to the point, it looks like it's being unburied, especially in such a level area. Continuing, the Wirangu people once lived over the area, including Ceduna. Sea level rise, 18,000 to 7,500 years ago, completely displaced inhabitants of previous coastal areas and resulted in dramatic changes in distributions of peoples. Okay, if you say so. Also, Matthew Flinders allegedly explored and named stuff. So did Nicholas Borden. Are we sure about that, Wikipedia? There's no citation for this paragraph whatsoever. This seems to just be accepted knowledge. Of course he did. The first European exploration of the hinterland was during August to September 1839 by John Hill and Samuel Stevens, using the chartered brig Rapid as a base. Hill reported to Governor Gawler that although the bay was valuable, the hinterland was waterless, thereby stalling European interest. Been a heck of a long time since we've had a character. Let's have a couple of characters instead. These seem like a likely pair. John Hill, 1810 to 1860, was an English explorer of South Australia and part of the European exploration of Australia. Hill was the first European to see and traverse the Clare Valley. An enigmatic and little-known individual, during the late 1830s, John Hill sighted and named several important rivers of South Australia, as well as many lesser streams and creeks. The former unquestionably included the Wakefield and Hutt rivers, plus most probably, likely, maybe, perhaps, the Gilbert and Light rivers. He was also the first European to explore the headwaters of the Torrens and Onkaparinga rivers. No citation again. In 1908, the Register newspaper, while incorrectly naming him William, accorded him the title of South Australia's Discoverer of Rivers, finally a citation, and they got his name wrong. Hill River and Mount Hill are named after him. So, enigmatic and little known, the citation is 80 years after the fact and a newspaper that got his name wrong. John was born about 1810 in London, UK. Nothing is known of his ancestry or childhood. Emerging from an apparently affluent family, he arrived in Sydney in the mid-1830s as a well-educated and financially independent young man. A pastoralist with extensive herds in Bathurst, possibly, maybe, according to at least one account, migrated to South Australia only a year after it was founded on the Currency Lass. Yep, that's the name of the boat, the Currency Lass. He took to exploring on horseback and became a prominent citizen of Adelaide. The page makes mention of his connection to the Secondary Towns Association located in London in 1843. This association would seem important but doesn't have its own page. I'm sure it will come up again though. It goes on. For reasons of competitive advantage, the results of these explorations were usually confidential, being provided only to the Association Board in London or to the local government, but were only rarely provided to newspapers for publication. John enjoyed high social status in South Australia until 1843, being appointed to grand juries and influential commercial positions, although never holding public office. Get this. In contrast, after 1843, whilst he was working with the Secondary Towns Association, that is, Hill played no further prominent part in the colony's affairs. Are we sure about that? Apparently, sapped by financial misfortune, his life then became enigmatic. He returned to Adelaide around 1845, but lived in almost total obscurity. Although this was possibly self-imposed, former associates evidently regarded him as a social outcast. He died in Adelaide in 1860, aged only 50, from an ulcer-related condition, and was interned in an unmarked pauper's grave according to the Register newspaper. There is no record that he ever married. In closing, it says, his personal courage as an explorer is undoubted. Absolutely, it's unquestionable, so don't question it. But he often failed to adequately record and proclaim his sightings, thereby failing to gain recognition for them, even though it's already been stated they were provided to the association. For well over a century, there was much confusion and incorrect attribution among historians concerning his name and achievements until a research paper published in 2013, released as a book in 2015, convincingly identified and documented him. Suspect, if you ask me. Who noticed the new symbol I slipped in there? We need to talk about the Oddfellows briefly. They come up a lot in South Australia. We all know who the other mob are. I found this interesting tidbit on South Australia History Hub. It's in the fine print. 1834, origins. The first South Australian Freemasons Lodge is consecrated in London prior to colonisation. Its first meeting is held 4 years later in Adelaide. Just how well planned and controlled was this heist, my friends? Or did they start long before the records say they did? Back to the Odd Squad. I found a list of them. from the second line, the Oddfellows lodges appear to date back to as early as 1730 and advocate for civil liberties and reliefs, while stating they remain religiously and politically independent. The fellowship is known for promoting philanthropy, the ethic of reciprocity and charity, with some having a Christian affiliation. So, they're just like the Masons, and many famous Masons are Oddfellows, but they're not the same, or are they? And just to note, although we seem to know nothing much about John Hill until he had a book written about him in 2013, the Oddfellows had him as a registered member in 1844. Next character, Samuel Stevens. Samuel Stevens, 1808 to 1840, was an English businessman who was the first colonial manager appointed by the South Australian Company to the new colony of South Australia. The what? The South Australian Company. Let me just summarise the rest. I've completely lost interest in Sam here, but for posterity's sake. Son of a Wesleyan Methodist reverend, had a brother called Edward, who was also important in the settlement of South Australia. Applied to the South Australian Company at 27 as an assistant surveyor, and surprise of all surprises, was appointed as the first manager of the company. That was a good stroke of luck, wasn't it? He was the second person to get married in the new colony and the subject of much gossip amongst the 100 or so people there by marrying a woman 23 years older than him. Intemperate and inept and a tardy manager, goodness, attempted murder, almost sacked from his 7-year contract early. But he was a good judge of land and agricultural prospects. Blah, blah. It's a bit of a soap opera page, this one. The dramatic ending is he died at only 31, leaving poor Charlotte a widow after less than a year of marriage in a tragic but suspicious horse riding accident. I feel like I've just watched a season final of Home and Away. But what about the South Australia Company? Oh yeah, the South Australia Company. Well, this was unexpected. South Australian Company. The South Australian Company, also referred to as the South Australia Company, was formed in London on 9 October 1835 after the South Australia Foundation Act 1834 had established the new British province of South Australia, with the South Australian Colonisation Commission set up to oversee implementation of the Act. The South Australian Company was a commercial enterprise and not officially connected to the British government or the Colonisation Commission, but turned out to be indispensable in allowing emigration to the new colony to begin. The founding board of the company, headed by George Fife Angus, consisted of wealthy British merchants with the purpose of developing a new settlement in South Australia, building a new colony by meeting an essential financial obligations, something like that, of the South Australian Act 1834. It brought up unsold land to the level required by the Act for emigration to be allowed to begin. During the first years of settlement, the company built a great deal of infrastructure, I bet it did, and contributed to the creation of industries such as fishing and mining, and it continued to play an important part in the business affairs of the colony and later state of South Australia for over 100 years. It ended business in its own right on 17 March 1949, when it was liquidated by Elders Trustee and Executor Company Limited. Many streets in Adelaide were named after men associated with the company. I'll come back to this at a later date. I want to look at who's involved and who they are. Okay, so that's a huge discrepancy with the Sejuna page. It gets even better, folks. So it was founded by a private company whose members purchased the land and built a lot of infrastructure that's completely left out of everything I've looked at so far. And there was nothing there, especially water. Continuing. There was, however, a whaling station on nearby St. Peter Island during the 1850s, well before settlement. And we know this, even though there is no citation whatsoever, because archaeologists have found whale bones there. I wonder if the South Australian Company put them there. So I looked to the South Australian Heritage Register as the only useful reference for St. Peter's Island. Note that it's a building footprint, apparently. The St. Peter Island whaling station provides evidence of one of the colony's first export industries, of which little is known or documented, maybe because it was a private company and they kept the records. It is one of a very small number of whaling station sites that have been located in South Australia. The site of the St. Peter Island whaling station may yield information about the whaling industry and the living and working conditions of whalers engaged in this early staple industry. And then it quotes a report here, HSA assessment report, which I couldn't find, but the HSA is the Housing Safety Authority. So it's only a building footprint and it apparently belonged to whalers. And that's all I can tell you there. Back to Ceduna. The Commissioner of Crown Lands, faced with widespread agitation to open West Coast lands for agricultural settlement, invited 3 farmers in 1887 to inspect the lands between Streaky Bay and Western Australia. That's a massive area, especially if you're travelling by horse or camel. They were optimistic about the area and recommended that the necessary surveys be started at once. In 1889, the government in Adelaide formalised the Far West with survey lines. Well, that's a good story, Wikipedia, and well told. No citation again, and no truth either. Doing my due diligence, I wanted to know who the Commissioner of Crown Lands was back in 1887, not to mention the 3 farmers, so we could see if any of them dealt in secret handshakes too, if you know what I mean. But this yielded me nothing. I couldn't find one. And then, on another page, Wikipedia informed me that the position of Chief Commissioner lapsed entirely in 1878 and they were abolished. Following the citation at the bottom of this page got me to the Museums of History page, not the actual Commissioner's Guide. I had to search again for that, and it didn't come up under the museum page or the State Archive link. I had to use an external search engine to find it. Let's have a look at that. Way down the bottom, in 1870, the office of the Chief Commissioner of Crown Lands lapsed. 1870. And the department became known as the Occupation Branch of the Lands Department. Control of the local Crown Lands Commissioners was transferred to the Department of Mines in 1878, and the local Crown Land Commissioners were abolished about 1880. Records of the Occupation of Lands branch of the Department of Mines were destroyed in the Garden Palace fire in Sydney on the 22nd of September 1882. No wonder they're so vague. That's helpful, isn't it? Moving on, back to Ceduna. In June 1901, the town of Ceduna was proclaimed. For many years, locals called the township Murat Bay, and it was not until the railways came and called the siding Ceduna in 1915 that locals adopted the name. The Ceduna Jetty was built in 1902. The Todd Water Pipeline was officially opened by Mr. M. McIntosh. Commissioner of Public Works, June 1928. We'll come back to the Todd Reservoir at a later date. There's some dodgy goings on in that area too. As for the rest of it, it has a suspect satellite dish. Blah blah. Description. The town is the last major settlement before crossing the Nullarbor Plain from east to west. And tourism. Ceduna is known as the gateway to the Nullarbor Plain, and being on the National Highway, its traffic flow is over 240,000 vehicles a year. And it's the site of the state quarantine border. So eat up all your veggies before you get there from Perth, or they'll take them off you. They let me do a U-turn, and I stayed 3 days in Denial Bay and around that area until I'd eaten or cooked all of mine. Moving on. Note that I did check other sources for a bit better history than Wikipedia and found out that even the District Council of Ceduna is pretty much word for word the same as Wikipedia. Moving on. Thevenard. Is it Thevenard or Thievenard? Was it thieved? Thevenard. Thevenard is a port town in the far west of Eyre Peninsula, South Australia. It is contiguous with the larger town of Ceduna. Its name derives from nearby Cape Thevenard, which in turn was named after Antoine Jean-Marie Thevenard, a French admiral. In the 2021 census, Thevenard had a population of 563. The port handles bulk grain, gypsum, salt and zircon. Thevenard is a terminus of the privately operated Lake McDonald-Thevenard Railway, link now gone, which delivers 3 trains of bulk gypsum daily from the Lake McDonald mine, 65 kilometres or 40 miles to the west. Production from the mine, owned by Gypsum Resources Australia, is about 3.5 million tonnes per year. So let's take a quick look at that. Lake McDonald is a salt lake on western Eyre Peninsula near the Nullarbor Plain. The closest town is Penong, 13 kilometres to the north. It is the site of a former salt mine, now the largest gypsum mine in Australia, on the largest gypsum deposit in the southern hemisphere. Salt is still mined, but as a secondary product. I won't go through this because it talks about stuff that I would say is nonsense. The gypsum deposit has a 1 metre layer of gypsaronite containing 93% gypsum, calcium sulfate. Below that is a 5 metre layer of selenite containing 94 to 96% calcium sulfate. The deposit may contain as much as 500 to 700 million tonnes over an area of 87 square kilometres, 34 square miles. You're going to get a look at the picture in a sec. Gypsum has been mined at Lake McDonald since 1919. Since 1984, the mine has been owned by Gypsum Resources Australia, which is owned 50% each by USG Boral, blah, 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 and CSR Limited. Production is about 3.5 million tonnes per year. Gypsum is mined using bulldozers and excavators. It is stockpiled for several years to allow salt to leach out from natural rainfall. It is then loaded onto trains using front-end loaders. Gypsum is transported 64 kilometres on an isolated railway by Horizon to the port of Thevenard. Normally 3 trains run each weekday with fewer at weekends. It is further stockpiled at Thevenard, then loaded onto ships to Glebe Island in Sydney for further processing. The railway's terminus is named Kevin. I don't think we need to go any further than that. Let's look at the picture. That's not starry shaped. Don't be silly. Don't be silly, Lisa. Let's have a look on Google. Okay. Well, I'm not going to say it again. You can see that there's some strangeness. I just thought I'd pop us down on the ground and have a look what we can see from the ground. But from the corner, 2008. So these images haven't been updated since 2008. I have to say, straight off the bat, it looks like I'm in exactly the same place as I was back in Everything is Salty, the Sky Bees and Salt Pans video. So again, another spot nearby. It just looks exactly the same. Strange brown plants which tend towards purplish in the sun. Dirt roads, sandy ground, little bits of rock. Little bits of rock, not much else. And on the other side, same again. There's nothing. There's nothing there. So 2008, that was, it can't have been that long. 16 years ago. So in 16 years, they've revealed it to be something entirely different. Let's look at some photos from down near the jetty. Okay, these are just from Google, from Point Sinclair. Some really fascinating layered rock. More rock with interesting cutouts at the bottom. Are they caves? How deep do they go in without a boat? You probably can't find out. You have to dive, swim in. Some very interesting block shapes there. There's lots of layers, but they're all crooked. They're not particularly straight. Some melty, nasty bits. And from the beach nearby, very eroded, dare I say eroded in air quotes, melted. A quick 1-minute history of the sign. The jetty, in 1909, the West Coast Shipping Company imported the Wookata from the shipping yards of Glasgow. This 650 gross tonne, 180-foot long ketch made her maiden voyage to Point Sinclair in 1909, laden with 40 tonnes of timber, from which the new jetty was to be built at Point Le Hunt. The jetty was originally 972 feet long and at the height of 12 feet at low tide. In the early days, the jetty featured a bend on the seaward end. It is understood that the reason for this was to enable the vessels tied up at the jetty to face their bows into the strong currents flowing around the point. A 50-square-foot goods shed was built, and later 2 rooms were added to the back of the structure for the living quarters of the then harbour master, Captain Olaf Nielsen. When the jetty, goods shed and the harbour master's residence were finally finished in 1911, it was officially opened by Governor Le Hunt, after whom the port took its name. Good size comparison, an interesting layer there. It's I don't know if it's on an angle or the ground is on an angle. And in the top left corner, another layer. Pretty pictures of the lake, the pink lake. And this is Mackenzie's ruins. This was a nearby grain farm. It's definitely old world. It's got the fireplaces and a cistern. Not much else around. Continuing, that was a nice little rabbit hole, wasn't it? Are we all okay? Iluka Resources exports about 300,000 tonnes of zircon concentrate from Thevenard per year, which the company mines and processes at the Jacinth Ambrosia mine, 270 kilometres northwest of Thevenard. Delivery is by road. Let's have a look at that mine quickly. The Jacinth Ambrosia mine is a mine operated by Iluka Resources. The primary output of the mine is zircon, used in making ceramics. The mine exploits both the jacinth and ambrosia deposits, which were discovered in 2004. Mining commenced in 2009. Ore is processed on site to produce a concentrate which is transported to Thevenard, then shipped to a plant at Nangaloo in Western Australia for further processing into zircon, rutile, let's give me a picture of that, yep, and I've never heard of that before, ilmenite. It's weakly magnetic. The concentrate is transported to Thevenard by road with approximately 18 B-triple trucks per day carrying 96 tonnes each. A 100-kilometre unsealed haul road was constructed for the mine along with the upgrading 80 kilometres, blah, blah, blah. The mine operates inside of the Yelbina Regional Reserve, a conservation park, and is served by the Jacinth Ambrosia Airport. We don't need to know. Around 70 workers operate on a fly-in, fly-out basis. It is the first mine in South Australia to be approved for development in a regional reserve. Seed and topsoil are collected and stored. Seed and topsoil. The mineral sands deposit is in tertiary age sediments of the Eucla Basin. So mineral sands is the rough term for what they're mining there. Let's take a look at that mine. Right, and there it is on Google. Glad you've seen it. Let's just see where it is first. Okay, so it would appear there's some nearby water. Let's have a look at the water. Oh, no. There's not water anymore. That's it, folks. That's where it is. That's where it is in Australia. Right down the bottom there. That's your mine. So it's not looking like a heck of a lot yet. It is an interesting shape. I did want to point out, though, that these salt lakes, as they are, it does have some odd shapes to it. Coincidence or not, I don't know. That's more of it up there. This is your conservation park, by the way. So be very careful with that land. Dear. And the other thing I did want to say about that mine was in February 2010, this is the Ceduna page, by the way, Premier Mike Rann opened the world's largest mineral sands mine. So it's the world's largest mine in a conservation park, operated by Iluka Resources. The $390 million mine is located 200 kilometres northwest of Ceduna. Take 3. I'm sure we'll get through this wiki page now. It's not the longest page and there's next to no history. Thevenard again. So this is all about the jetty's size. If you want to know, there's nothing about its construction. Where Thevenard is, the District Council of Ceduna. Don't need to know. This is basically the only history. Greek immigration to Thevenard, especially by people in the fishing industry, has been important in shaping the town's culture. Greeks from Thevenard are believed to have introduced eating barramundi to Anglo-Celtic Australians. And for that, I am extremely grateful. I have no idea what relevance that is to anyone or anything. It's like the price of tea in China. Barramundi is not even a local fish to South Australia. As noted here, the distribution of barramundi is across northern Australia. Thanks for wasting our time on that, Wikipedia. What the? One last time, I forgot to show you the pictures. 3 trains a day bringing gypsum from Lake McDonald, which we looked at. And the other image, map, and the energy harvester. View of the Lighthouse Memorial commemorating those lost at sea. So go there, examine that, and think about dead people. Moving on. Is this some real history? From the website borrel.com.au, I believe they now own the area. Australian gypsum industry's history. In 1892, the Earl of Kintore, Governor of Her Majesty's Province of South Australia and the dependencies, signed an indenture granting the Australian Gypsum and Whiting Company Limited and its successors full and free liberty to dig, sink, drive, make and use all such pits, shafts, levels, watercourses and other works which it may be necessary to use in seeking for finding, winning, working and obtaining the metals and minerals not being gold therein contained. So basically they could destroy anything that wasn't gold. This lease permitted the first gypsum mining operations to begin at Marion Lake in the 100 of Warranaben on Cape York in South Australia. For another day, but I have to point out that Marion Lake is all the way over here. The name Australian Gypsum was derived from a Sydney company that began producing plaster more than 50 years before at Duck Creek near Parramatta in Sydney's west. I hail from Parramatta, that's a can of worms, that one. Initially, its gypsum supplies came from Roto in Western New South Wales, but in the early 1920s, leases were obtained at Lake McDonald in South Australia, where gypsum was bagged for shipment to Sydney. A historical image there. You wouldn't put much gypsum in a ship that size, if it's even a ship. During the 1920s, 4 major gypsum and plaster companies operated on the York Peninsula. Financial difficulties caused by the major decline in building activity in the 1930s depression led to talks between these companies, which culminated in the merger of their businesses under the name Australian Gypsum Products Proprietary Limited. This rationalisation of the group operations meant that all mining activities were stopped except on the Marion Lake deposit. I won't go on for the rest of that, but again, history, the change of guard in who owns it, and its private industry that was originally separate 4 major companies consolidated into one. So again, convoluting the history. On the Regional Development of Australia website, found a newspaper article, but I couldn't access it without paying. But this tells me what I needed to know anyway. Thevenard Port Access temporary closure. Apparently it was dangerous. I just wanted to point this part out. The concerns are with the older concrete jetty part of the structure, which supports a section of Viterra's shiploading conveyor belt, and are not related to the timber jetty or the newer concrete jetty structure, which supports the ships and the ship loader. So this is I just wanted that description for us. This is the image in question. The older concrete. Is this old world? Look at that's a really, really heavy duty render over the top. and it's most likely been modified. But this is very granite looking inside. It's not your regular concrete, older concrete. It looks like concrete on the outside, but look underneath. And then there was a historical image of them supposedly building. I'll just quickly show you that. This photo, rock being removed from the seabed by a dredger called Wallaroo for construction work at the new jetty site at Cape Thevenard, South Australia. Workmen using chains and ropes are removing rock from the dredging buckets. This is in 1918. Let's look at the image. Does this look like construction to you or deconstruction? They're removing rock, but look what's attached to the bottom of the rocks. So it's not rock, it's some form of concrete, and these are workmen. Can I expand that? That's broken, but it's attached. What are they really doing? Just zooming in a little bit closer on that image. I don't know what I'm looking at, but I'm not looking at what they say I'm looking at. So if it's dredged, and these are dredging buckets, not that they look like buckets, but look at that. What is that? And you've got the vanilla sky happening there too. Dredging buckets. Righto. See what other construction images I can find. Okay. The new jetty under construction at Cape Thevenard in 1915. Another cloudless but also sunless day, aka no shadows. Hang on, let me zoom in. Now, these pipes or columns or whatever they are look very much like the so-called dredging bucket ends we saw in the previous not-so-construction image. They also look rather used to me. I wonder if they'd finished unburying the railway line by that point or how they got them there. The next one, same new jetty under construction, approximately 1919 or thereabouts somewhere, give or take a few years, it doesn't matter. So there's some kind of railway happening and there's some jetty constructed. Unsure what's going on in the background though, if that's the water going uphill, but it looks too high for the other side of the bay or St. Peter's Island. This side of the bank looks all very neatly finished, at least in parts of it, and except the bits where it isn't. And on the left side, the rubble at the bottom matches the lower part of the rubble on the right side. Okay. No, I'm sure they meant it to be like that, or it's still in progress. Next is a new concrete jetty under construction, same place, all good, 1920. Okay, so from this angle, it looks like the old concrete part of the jetty from the coloured image that we started with. And the background looks slightly more accurate in this one. Oops, that bit must have rolled away. Similar or the same number of sections as in the modern image. Hard to see a lot else, except clearly not much dredging work's done over this side. I don't know, folks. Construction or deconstruction or total fiction. This one, workmen positioning a reinforced concrete caisson during the construction of the same jetty, Thevenard, 1919. This one looks like it's from a newspaper, not an original image. So we have a reinforced concrete caisson. They can float apparently, and there's 3 men on the job but only 2 on the rope. Whilst I am sceptical this might be an achievable task, but where's the background gone in this image? And look at the rubble and mess on the new jetty. It's a random assortment, isn't it? They'll need to climb over all that or swim back by the looks of it. I'll press on. I think there was a few more, but these were all the ones that I kept. And an image of it after completion. So all clean and tidy-ish, ready for ships, and those pesky wayward pipes are now clean and chained down to something. So there are no problems with them. Great. Moving on. Let's look at some gypsum facts. I really didn't want to do it, but building on the salt pans theory and what I've been looking at in South Australia, from the Government of South Australia, Energy and Mining, let's look at gypsum. Gypsum global production in 2013 was 160 megatonne. In 2013, gypsum production in South Australia was estimated at 4.4 megatonne, which is 80% of the total Australian production. Gypsum is a naturally occurring hydrated calcium sulfate. Its main use is in the manufacture of plaster products, including wall and ceiling boards, mouldings and blocks for construction use, as well as sculpturing plasters, medical and dental uses, and pottery. These uses rely on the relative ease with which gypsum loses and then regains its water of crystallization. When heated to 300 to 350 degrees Celsius, gypsum loses 75% of its H2O to form the hemihydrate form of calcium sulfate known as plaster of Paris. When water is added, this material can spread, cast or moulded prior to regaining its water of crystallization and setting. Gypsum used for plaster manufacture usually contains at least 90% calcium sulfate and a maximum of 0.02% sodium chloride or salt, and approximately 2% acid insolubles. Another major use of gypsum is in the cement industry, where it is added at the rate of 2 to 5% to cement clinker prior to final grinding to retard the setting rate of concrete. Cement-grade gypsum tolerates higher sodium and insolubles. Okay, so in agricultural gypsum is being increasingly used to treat sodic soils, symptoms of which are waterlogging, increased runoff, poor water storage, surface crusting, and problems with cultivation and erosion. Sodium causes swelling and dispersion of clay. The clay particles may then move through the soil, clogging pores and reducing infiltration and drainage. The calcium from gypsum displaces the sodium, which can then be leached deeper into the soil. South Australian production, we don't need to know the rest of that. But that's interesting, isn't it then? That this, without the gypsum, the soil becomes more sodic or more salty. We'll skip a bit because it's not really helpful to us. I'm not going to read the coastal salinas because it's all theory based on how it was formed, and we're going to argue that case anyway. It's there if you want to read it. Pause and have a look. Continental players. Gypsum in these inland lakes is older than that in coastal salinas, with deposition thought to have ceased 16,000 years before present. The lakes are all in enclosed depressions in relatively impermeable sandy clay, and at the time of deposition were closed basins subject to rapid seasonal variation in volume and salinity of the brine pool. As for coastal salinas, these are the conditions favouring seasonal development of new sand-sized prisms and deposition of laminated gypsaronite. The players are not connected to an infinite reservoir of saline water, and the source of the gypsum is uncertain. It is likely that the salts were flushed from gypsic soils, which are common in surrounding areas. The largest of these players is at Blanchetown in the Murray Basin and is mined predominantly for plaster and cement manufacture. Lunettes developed on the leeward side of the continental players are the sources of much of the state's agricultural gypsum. Okay, so forgetting where it was deposited, because they can't prove that, they're going to cite radiocarbon dating or something to account for that. So the lakes, sorry, I don't mean to go over it again, but I just want to get it straight for us. The lakes are all in enclosed depressions in relatively impermeable sandy clay. How did the lakes get there? And at the time of deposition were closed basins, yes, individual lakes in spots all across the bottom of the nation, subject to rapid seasonal variation in volume and salinity of the brine pool. Okay, so that's just related to rainfall, how much water's in there. As for coastal salinas, these are the conditions favouring seasonal development of new sand-sized prisms and deposition of laminated gypsaronite. They're not connected to an infinite reservoir of saline water, and the source of the gypsum is uncertain. This part, it is likely that the salts were flushed from gypsic soils, which are common in surrounding areas. How did the salt get flushed from the gypsum? And the clay would be more permeable with the gypsum still in it. That's a chemical reaction. Okay, I'm just going to skim over the next few bits because these are the areas that we're looking at, but I'm not interested in all the tonnage and the numbers. I just want to know the history. So Lake McDonald is the largest in 1983. That's interesting. Operations commenced in 1919. Don't need to know that. Operated by Gypsum Resources of Australia Proprietary Limited since 1984, when CSR Limited and Boral Limited combined their separate operations. Gypsum as mined is too high in salt content for plaster manufacture, so it is stockpiled on site for several years to allow leaching by rainwater. When the salt content has been sufficiently reduced, the gypsum is railed 64 kilometres to a 160,000 tonne stockpile at Thevenard for loading on ships by conveyor. Streaky Bay. This is near where we were for salt pans and skybees. The largest known undeveloped deposit in South Australia is 26 kilometres south of Streaky Bay. Don't need to know all that. How do I say that? Beetlebug? Davenport Creek, a resource of 5 megatons of selenite and gypsaronite up to 5 metres thick and containing up to 97% calcium sulphate, has been delineated by Pioneer Plasterboard Proprietary Limited for use in wallboard manufacture in Sydney and Melbourne. Gypsum has been stockpiled to leach salt prior to shipment through the port of Thevenard. So that's another company, Pioneer. Stenhouse Bay. In the 1890s, a tramline, jetty and loading facility were erected at Marion Bay on southern York Peninsula to handle gypsum mined from Lake Inniston, and continuous production began in 1913. Marion Lake was brought into production shortly after, and together these deposits provided the bulk of South Australian output until the end of World War II. Okay, so that's all much later. It's the historic stuff I'm interested in. Lake Fowler, Adelaide Brighton Cement Limited. Later, Kangaroo Island. Mining operations were initiated in 1956. We won't worry about that. And then 2002. Okay, we'll leave it there. We might come back to that in future if we need it. Moving on. I just wanted to throw these images in as well and tidy up some loose ends. There are several of these images of a ropeway on the State Library page, a bucket system for moving diggings around. Several of the images had the word Kowalka on them, even the ones that were meant to be in Thevenard. Kowalka turned up nothing else in searches, but they say it's meant to say Kowalka. Okay, maybe a simple spelling error. Or maybe they changed the name to protect the guilty. Anywho, Google seemed to think it had a train station. The library states that it was a siding and a lightly constructed line that's long been removed. I had to wonder if it wasn't another area that's been completely sanitised. I only put this in really because the images look a bit dodgy, don't you think? From 1930 apparently. But while I have you, check this awesome old world engine that was supposedly powering the ropeway, complete with bolted on nameplate in English, so you don't know just how old it really is. What a beaut she is, huh? And one more thing, where's Colombo? Wrapping up, the nearby town of Penong, I slipped an image in earlier, is the remnants of an old world town. The school, the pub, and this strange little hall were obvious old world buildings. There were a few chimneys about the town, but not much else to indicate just how old its origins must be. So, there we are. That's 2 confirmed former star forts, almost completely erased, potentially more. Who knows what was really on St. Peter Island? And not forgetting that the Northern Territory, I can't say it today, the Northern Territory was also considered part of South Australia for much of our early history. I'm yet to delve into that part of the country at all. So many mines. It feels more like landmines as they go off in my face, so to speak, when I start digging around them. Enough with the metaphors. I'm only part way through what was meant to be my next video, so as usual, this wasn't it. Again, that one's turned out to be bigger than expected, so it may be a series. It's almost ready, but not quite. Then there's the editing. As I've said before, I don't like making long videos, but as I got neck deep in Everything is Ned, I had no choice but to keep going to do it justice. In the meantime, I have a strange castle and some missing bits and nonsensical tales from the Adelaide area to look at, and we will come back to Lake Marion and a missing star fort at Inniston. I mean, deposit. Just a mine, right? It's not always easy making videos from a bus, but I am doing it. Here I'll provide you with a quick example of trying to record on the road just for a laugh. He just dropped it. Well, thanks for joining me today, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure, for me at least. Hopefully the Star Fort naysayers are able to dust themselves off and get over it. Everything is a lie, especially what they tell you is history. Much love for now, and I'll catch you next time. Bye for now.
Morning fields of amber grain, weathered faces lined in pain are soothed beneath the artist's loving hand. Now I understand what you tried to say to me, and how you suffered for your sanity, and how you tried to set them free. They would not listen.
If you enjoyed this presentation or any of my others, please consider buying me a cup of coffee to help keep the channel going. Thank you.